So today we do the all-important head-to-head comparison of Audeze versus new Audeze. Now these are both high-end planar magnetic headphones, but this one is the MM-500. It just came out recently and costs an extra $500. So the question is it actually better? Let's find out. This is Andrew with Headphones.com, and yes, today we're taking a look at the brand new Audeze MM-500 and comparing it against the older LCD-X 2021 from last year. Now, if you guys are looking for the full review of the MM-500 with a comparison to the LCD-5 and the Hi-Fi Aria Stealth, I've published a full written review of that, and that's already up on Headphones.com. I'll leave a link to that in the description if you guys are curious. Now, just for reference, the MM-500 is named MM, or as I like to call it, MM, because it was designed in collaboration with a guy named Manny Marroquin, and I'm very confident that I've just butchered that name, so I apologize for that. He's apparently an award-winning mixing engineer, and Audeze is definitely going after the pro-use market, at least they have been lately with a lot of their headphones, and this is sort of like the next version of that, and I think this probably also helps them kind of get a little bit of additional name recognition in that space. Now, I obviously am not a mix engineer, I just review headphones, as glamorous as that sounds. My evaluation here is a little bit more centered around what this is like for somebody just wanting to listen to high-end headphones. And I do think it is an interesting question whether this type of tuning is suitable for studio environment, but that's not the one that I'm going to be answering in this video. In any case, let's get down to it, and I want to start off with a general statement. The LCD-X 2021 right here is one of the more solid old school style Audeze headphones. And when I say old school, they have a sound that we might describe charitably as warm or relaxed or laid back. You get the idea. So even if you prefer the more clarity-focused tunings of the Hi-Fi headphones or something like the Sennheiser HD800S, I think it's fair to say that the LCD-X 2021 is one of the better versions of Audeze's older sound, even though it just came out like last year. And by contrast to that, the MM-500 represents Audeze's new tuning philosophy and what appears to be a new target that all of their recent releases have gone after, including the flagship LCD-5. But we'll get to the differences in the sound quality between these two in a moment. Let's first discuss the differences that exist when it comes to build design and comfort, because Audeze have made some big changes there as well, moving from the LCD-X to the new style of MM-500. And actually, you can see the similarity with the LCD-5 right here. They're very similar looking. You get the same kind of design going on. It's just that this one uses the resin cups and the carbon fiber headband, and this one, the MM-500, uses a more metallic kind of design to it. Personally, I like the look of the MM-500 a lot. It's one of my favorite looking headphones. And I like that it's also quite a bit smaller than the LCD-X, which feels quite beefy by comparison. So the LCD-X went on a diet basically, and then this is the result. But it's not just that. I mean, they've also done, that complete industrial design overhaul with everything to do with the headband, to, the way that, there's sort of like a tapered edge to the yoke structure here. And again, the colorway on this, it's fantastic. I get that this stuff is subjective, but I just have to say that the MM-500 is one of the best looking headphones out there. And it also feels super sturdy as well. Like it feels, the LCD-X is very rugged, but this is almost like even better feeling in the hand. And I think the LCD-X here almost feels unrefined in comparison as far as the build is concerned. But of course, as an appreciator of dark, muted, and metallic colors, I like the look of both of them. It's just that the MM-500 takes that to another level entirely. You see, the dead inside look can be appealing too. Headphones don't always need to look like spaceships to be eye-catching, and maybe they do, I don't know. But importantly, it is still a little bit heavier than the LCD-5 because there's more metal going on here. While it's lighter than the LCD-X, it's only by about 100 grams. Now, when it comes to ergonomics, unfortunately, things are a little bit more difficult. And I actually find the LCD-X to be the one that's more comfortable. Again, despite the fact that it is heavier. And the reason for this is that the MM-500 is just too clampy for my thick boy audiophile head. Let me just show you what it looks like when I put it on. And that's, both with the hat on and off. Here's how it looks. I immediately look better than I do when I'm not wearing this headphone, which is not hard, I suppose. When I wear it right now, it's actually okay initially, but then over time, that clamp does start to get to me. And while it could just be me who has this problem, I think this is just something to keep in mind if you have a larger or in particular a wider head or head shape. I think this is just constructive feedback for Audeze because it's been proven that 64% of audiophiles are unable to wear conventional headphones because their heads are just too large to fit them. We also struggle to go through standard doorways. and we can't bend over to tie our shoes without falling over. Life is hard. That's a joke. But the last thing I'll say about the clamp force issue is that I did actually try stretching this out over a block, which is off screen, and it did actually improve. So if you find that there's some initial clamp force, if you end up picking one of these up, try that at least, because the top piece here is spring steel and it does loosen over time. I just kind of wish that they had stuck with the headband design that's going on here, because this one is very comfortable for me up top. At least there isn't any clamp force issues with the LCD-X. So at least not for me. And I think just one other thing with the mechanical design here, I mean, you guys can't quite see this, but I'm holding them up kind of next to each other. You have a system on the LCD-X where the rods are actually, they're set more outwards, whereas on the MM500, they're kind of going in. And the reason there is because you actually need to have these coupled quite tightly to the side of the head to be able to get, you know, the ideal bass extension. Keep in mind that the pads are also different between these two. And so you want to have a good seal there, and so a certain amount of clamp force is actually a requirement. Now, let's talk about the sound quality, and let's begin by going through the differences in the tuning, because in a way, they're kind of opposites. So I'm going to throw the graphs up on the screen here. These were, of course, done with the industry standard gross measurement system with the KB5000 anthropometric pinup. I have to say that in every video, or at least indicate it somehow so you guys know what system these measurements are done on. But you can see that both are well extended in the bass and in the treble. But the LCD-X2021 is a little bit more relaxed in the upper mids at around 3K, the region amplified by the physical ear the most strongly. We want there to be a rise in that region, and this is where the LCD-X is a bit withdrawn in that region. In fact, I'd argue that this is probably where most Audeze headphones are actually quite withdrawn. The MM500, by contrast, actually has a little bit of a boost in that same region. So if you were previously, you know, turned off by the Audeze tunings because they didn't have enough upper mid-range, they didn't have as much kind of clarity there, that's one of the areas where you get that kind of clarity. The MM500 fixes that and then some, right? I would actually argue that it's just a tiny little bit overboard there on the MM500. And the reason I say that is because there are certain recordings where the upper mids on the MM500 can be just a little bit hot or a little bit glary. You might also describe this as shout. It's not because there's lots of treble or anything like that. It's not like treble fatigue. It's more just that that region is emphasized a little bit, or it's like pulled forward a little bit. And this can sort of be the effect. You can hear this, I think, most notably on vocals. But at the same time, there is a sense in which this definitely does add a sense of clarity that can be enjoyable when listening to various different instruments in recordings with lots of instruments, like piano tones would come forward a little bit more. You can also see that in the treble, the LCD-X's upper treble is boosted, where the MM500's is withdrawn, right at around 12K. So the LCD-X is more airy and sort of shimmery, while the MM500 is smoother and more natural in that region. With, again, a more mid-forward character to this one as a result. And so that's why I say that they're kind of opposites in a sense. But is the MM500 better? That's the question that we're here to answer. And in general, I'm going to say yes. In fact, the MM500 is what I'd consider to be the closest a high-end planar magnetic headphone has ever come to the sound signature of the legendary Sennheiser HD650, just with some of the planar benefits as well, like, you know, that better bass extension. It even has the same relaxed treble presentation, and overall it's clearly the more correct tuning between these two. At the same time, fans of the old Audeze sound, I imagine, are going to still prefer the LCD-X 2021. It's a far more laid-back tuning, which is something that people absolutely do enjoy. As long as you're aware of that, and you're still hellbent on chasing correctness, then I think, yes, the MM500 is better. It does sound better, or at least it's better at that. One other thing to consider is that oftentimes high-end planar magnetic headphones kind of go for broke with the treble presentation, like the mid and upper treble is kind of just boosted like crazy. It's less exciting there compared to the LCD-X, but it's also more normal in a good way, if that makes sense. Personally, I'd want them to go for something kind of in between these two, like exactly in between. I want a little bit less upper mids and a little bit more mid treble than the MM500 has, and also a little bit less upper treble than what the LCD-X has, and also more upper mids than the LCD-X has. I'm picky. What can I say? Such a nerd I am. You know, the more I listen to the MM500, the more I have to say that this is actually close. It's very close to what I'm after. I have to sort of applaud Audeze in this new direction that they're going with this, even though there are still things that I'm going to nitpick. I mean, that's just sort of what I do, you know, especially when it comes to the sound quality. This is very, very close. And when I do my EQ adjustments, it's just a very subtle kind of thing there. And I'm actually going to go as far as to say that the MM500 is one of, if not the best tuned Audeze headphone to date, at least for the high-end ones. So I think this is an important step in the right direction for Audeze, at least for the tuning. But now let's discuss the subjective differences, or all the things that are difficult to analyze frequency response in terms of the technicalities, if you will. I hear these two as being in a similar league overall, which is to say generally good. But I also hear them as differently technical. The MM-500 sounds a little bit tighter and more well controlled during busy passages with better image separation and distinctness. At the same time, the LCD-X 2021 sounds like it has somewhat longer lasting trailing ends of tones, if that makes sense. I can certainly see people enjoying that about the LCD-X. Even though I am more into the control aspect that the MM-500 seems to excel at. When it comes to soundstage and overall sense of space, the MM-500's mid-forward presentation has this effect where it kind of draws everything, more towards me and in front of me, rather than to the sides. Whereas the LCD-X I find to be a little bit more width focused. So I can actually see some people describing the LCD-X as being wider, but I would say that in both cases, the soundstage of these is in the acceptable category, but not anything crazy. And if you're, uniquely looking for soundstage at this price point, I'd actually recommend you go for the Sennheiser HD800S instead, or the HiFiMan Aria Stealth. I think those are both still a wider or larger presentation for sense of space. Again, I think a lot of this with the MM-500, it has to do with that mid-forward character that kind of brings everything in front of me. It's an intimate presentation, but I'm not going to say that this is particularly claustrophobic at the same time. And then for image placement, I don't have any issues with that. It doesn't seem to have any of that sort of blobbing effect where all the sounds are kind of localized to just a few regions. There's a much more, incremental kind of positioning to the images, which is very nice. And so for me, that's why, I think that's not why you buy this headphone, but it's totally fine there. Neither of these headphones are particularly special when it comes to dynamics or that sense of punch and impact. But again, this is where I'm going to say they are acceptable. They're not meaningfully compressed sounding to me. There's some planar magnetic headphones that sound really compressed, and these are totally fine there. But once again, if that's a thing that you are uniquely after, you're better off with one of the Vocals, or if you can find a used original HE6, it has to be the original. That one definitely does, slam harder than these. If that's a thing you care about, I don't care as much about that. And lastly, when it comes to timbre, I do hear the MM-500 as being a bit more natural sounding overall. And again, I think this is down to the treble differences. It's a smoother treble presentation. It's a bit subdued in favor of the mids, as I mentioned, and it doesn't have that kind of artificial, plasticky kind of treble presentation that you get with many planar magnetic headphones. I've actually been listening to a lot more lately where I've been kind of picking up on that quality. And the MM-500 is reasonably good there, even though it is still recognizably a planar. For those who've heard planars, there's a good chance you know what I'm talking about here. So that's basically how the MM-500 compares to the LCD-X 2021. So let's wrap this up. Leaving the comfort issues aside between these two, is the MM-500 a better sounding headphone than the LCD-X 2021? And in my view, the answer is yes. Specifically those who are looking for a more neutral or mid-forward kind of sound signature. But if you're at all bothered by an overemphasis to the upper mid-range, or you're sensitive to glare in that region, the LCD-X 2021 is probably the safer bet. It's likely to be less fatiguing for you in the long run. And once again, if the idea of a planar magnetic HD650 sounds good to you, the MM-500 is the closest thing to that yet. Closer even than the LCD-5. And I have to say, I'm really optimistic about Audeze's new tuning direction, with them being able to achieve that. But that's all just to do with sound quality. And maybe it really just is my head shape that's suboptimal. It's probably the case. It's hard to know for sure how this is going to be for, most people, or how it's going to fit for other people. It's just worth keeping that in mind that, for big boy heads like mine, it's still a bit of an issue. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this head-to-head phone comparison. I'm going to leave. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.